Dzień za dniem, noc za nocą, nasze życie upływa pod bezkresnym niebem. Marzymy o rzeczach wielkich, ale życzymy sobie rzeczy prostych. Myślami wybiegamy do przodu, ale jesteśmy świadomi, że życie toczy się tu i teraz. Spoglądamy w niebo z dobrego miejsca na ziemi.
Lepiej tak, nie? Niż tam.
Potential investment in West Nusa Tenggara. Why? West Nusa Tenggara is ready to accept visitors and businesses? Fastest growing region in Indonesia. Consistently beats national economic growth in 2014 to 2017. GRDP growth of 25.3%, from Q1 2014 to Q1 2018, the highest among 34 provinces. HDI index's growth of 8.9%, from 2010 to 2017, the highest among 34 provinces. Solid infrastructure. 98% of national road is in solid category. Zainuddin Abdulmajid Airport. Revitalization of Badas and Bima ports. Gilimas, Lembar Port Development. Dams. Pandandur, Bintang Bano, Rababaka Complex. Surplus of 25 megawatt. Additional 450 megawatt is in development. Strong government support. Online and centralized permit and tracking system. Clear KPIs for investment permit processing. Principal permit, 3 days. Investment permit, 6 days. Capable workforce. Young, vibrant workforce. Workforce size 50% of total population. Low unemployment, 3.32%. Strong university networks. A total of 42 universities across the province. West Nusa Tenggara's diaspora network, national and international. West Nusa Tenggara scholarship for all degrees, currently working with 26 universities in 5 countries around the globe.
Welcome to West Nusa Tenggara in Indonesia. As a governor, I have to make sure that our province is friendly to business community, friendly to investment, so we are so happy that you are interested to come to our province. Thank you very much.
Na program zaprasza sponsor Miasto Toruń.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome all of you for our panel, Emerging United States-China Bipolarism, Implications for Indo-Pacific Regional Order. So the topic of today's panel is very interesting. It's connected, of course, with huge dynamism in Asia and Pacific. A lot of events has happened in the last few years connected with US policy, of course, China activity, and of course there are more and more actors in Asia which are interested to be more and more assertive, and it is a question about for example, about the question about India approach towards US-China competition and cooperation. What does it mean for India? What does it mean for regional order? Such new situation, competition between United States and China. So I hope this panel will be very interesting for all of you, and I'm very excited because we have four very distinguished panelists who will try to explain the situation in the context of United States China competition cooperation. First speaker, Professor Haliczak, professor University from University of Warsaw, Faculty of Political Science and International Studies, the president of Polish Association of International Studies, the best expert on China in Poland and in Central Europe. And I think I don't need to add more about Professor Haliczak because he is very famous if we take into account this topic, China, United States in Asia and Pacific. And Professor will talk about dawn of US-China hegemonic war. The second speaker, Professor Grabowski, young star. If we talk about Asia Pacific subject, he focused in his research on United States policy in Asia and the Pacific. He's an author of many publications about this topic, and Professor Grabowski from Jagiellonian University, he will talk about US strategy in Asia Pacific and the rise of China. What is the approach of United States towards Asia Pacific in the context of Asia, in the context of the rise of China? The third speaker, Filip Grzegowski, he's a head of European Economic and Trade Office in Taiwan. We have some problem with connection with Filip Grzegowski, but we hope director, the head of European Union delegation will be successful in connection with us, and he will join us very soon, and he will talk about Taiwan, the role of Taiwan in US-China competition. Very interesting topic, and it will be very interesting to listen about Taiwan perspective in this in the context of our topic. And the last but not least, our great friend from India, Professor Shantanu Chakrabarti. He is from University of Calcutta. He's also a head of the Center for Polish and Central European Studies at the University of Calcutta. And he was many times in Poland at the University of Warsaw at Faculty of Political Science and International Studies. So he knows very well Polish perspective, but he will of course talk about Indian perspective on the topic US-China competition. What does it mean? What does it mean for India? What does it mean for Indo-Pacific? And we'll be very grateful to listen your opinion and comments. Each panelist will have about 50 maximum 15 minutes. So and after all the speeches, all the panelists, later I would like to invite you for discussion, debate and please put on chat if you have any comments. Please raise your hand, and please in the put information on the chat that you would like to make comment or to ask a question our panelist. So I'm very happy to have all of you, to have four very great panelists, and now I would like to invite Professor Halivak. So floor, but it's better. Screen is yours, Professor. So 12 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I started my research on US-China relations 20 years ago because I argued that this is the most important issue in contemporary international relations. 15 years ago, in 2005, I published in Polish such a small monograph with a title, Change US-China Balance of Power and Transformation of International Order. 15 years ago. And now when I am reading this, I am very proud of the conclusions and the way of I grasped this issue 15 years ago. As far as the US-China relations, we are witnessing a significant distribution of power between these two states. Distribution of power in favor of China. It means that the gap between US and China is narrowing. If we take only one indicator, the size of GDP at current prices, the share of US in the world economy is around 23%. The share of China is 16%. And scholars and economists are trying to set up the date when China will surpass United States in terms of GDP, when China will become #1 in the world economy. The scholars disagree on the exact date, but most of them are placing this structural shift between 2025 and 2030. What does it mean this for international relations, and for international, what does it mean this structural change for international relations? The effects of this structural shift is not easy to grasp because there are many models and theories which we have at our disposal to apply to analyze changing nature of the US-China relations. Let me start from the neoliberal paradigms. It is very useful instrument of research because China in recent 4 decades joined fully liberal order would be explained by the close cooperation with the international institutions. Other instruments are like Robert Gilpin, Theory of Hegemonic War. Then another instruments, power transition theory, formed by Organsky, US scholar, in, be careful, 1958. This theory is a little bit forgotten. And also there's another instrument, a scientific instrument developed by Modelsky and Thomson. I'd like you to remember that George Modelsky, Jan Modelsky, was a Polish origin, Polish scholar. He was a son of one of the close associate of our Prime Minister Sikorski. Modelsky and Thomson proposed the so-called long cycles theory as an instrument of explanation relations between great powers. In my opinion, Gilpin theory of hegemonic war and theory of power transition theory are the best instrument to analyze relations between United States and China. Let me start from the power transition theory. Power transition theory is based on two assumptions and two variables. First, relative power concept. Relative power concept. It's a very good concept to measure the change of relative power between the United States and China. When Deng started its reform 40 years ago, the China GDP was 16 lower than US. And now, as I mentioned, the China GDP is about 70% of the US GDP. And the second important variable introduced by Organsky is a degree of satisfaction. Degree of satisfaction of great power of international order. So the question is, which power, superpower, China or the United States, is satisfied or dissatisfied from the present international order? There is a common view, a widespread view, that China is dissatisfied with the international order. And United States is satisfied. So there is the inevitability of a hegemonic war between them. Few years ago, George Allison wrote a famous publication on the inevitability of war between China and the United States, and it was based on this assumption that China, being a dissatisfied power, will start hegemonic war. I do not totally agree with this claim. My observation and empirical facts support my claim that the United States is highly dissatisfied power. From the not existing, from the existing to the United States is very favorable to China. So China is a great beneficiary of the existing international liberal order, which help China to fill the gap with the United States. This is the greatest irony of the present relations between United States and China. China is highly dissatisfied. If we look at the official speeches, view expressed by Chinese officials, they totally support the existing international order and the institutions. China, we do not find any indicators that China will try to undermine the present order, because China is a free rights using a free rights strategy, achieve a lot. China is satisfied. And China, this is the great irony that authoritarian state is defending liberal order, the basic structure of liberal order set up by the democratic West and the democratic countries after the Second World War. United States is highly dissatisfied. If we look there at the official speeches, statement by President Trump, Mark Pompeo, and Vice President, speeches in the recent 4 years, the conclusion is obvious. United States, is not satisfied. United States want to change something in order to counter the growth of the United States. So, in concluding, in my opinion, United States is a superpower which tries to defend its position, and by doing this, United States just started hegemonic war. What is the essence of this hegemonic war? Try to prevent to rise another superpower. The question is the United States is able to prevent China to become a global superpower? I don't think so. And this is the one feature of this war. The second feature is the fact that hegemonic war is running within the highly independency, economic interdependency between both countries. How to pursue hegemonic war in the condition of high economic interdependency? That in hegemonic war, can you imagine when United States impose high tariffs on imports from China, about 3,000 of US companies formed a claim to the claims against the United States government. Private American firms to pursue against the United States government in the court. And the last, empirical examples. Elon Musk built in recent 2 years near the Shanghai a huge factory of car where the 500,000 of electric car Tesla has been produced. So Elon Musk, genius, business genius, and great innovator, is financing its space program by doing money with China. 500,000 of electric car will be totally produced in China, near the Shanghai. And what is the more irony? 25% of this project has been financed by the Chinese government. So, given this interconnectedness, given its interconnectedness, so the hegemonic war between United States and China will take a form of a severe economic competition, mainly in high-tech industries, and fortunately will not embrace military domain. So my conclusion is rather positive and a little bit optimistic about this essence of this hegemonic war, because money still matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes, thank you very much, Professor, for very, very interesting presentation. And I think now we could now listen Professor Grabowski, Professor Marcin Grabowski from Jagiellonian University, who will have opportunity to develop this aspect, one of the aspects which was raised by Professor Haliczak. What is, what was, what is, and what will be an answer of United States in the context of China rise? What is the strategy of the United States in Asia Pacific? So Professor Grabowski, screen is yours. So also with 12-13 minutes, please.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to actually build upon what was said already by Professor Haliczak, to refer to some dimensions. Actually, I'm sitting at home, as most of you, and I have Professor Haliczak's crucial book at very important shelf of my bookshelf, next to Enrico Fell's book on shifting powers in the Asia Pacific that I will refer also. So I'm happy to to be here and to discuss it. I had some issues that I will omit in my presentation, as generally as far as I understood, some issues were already mentioned by Professor Haliczak. That's actually good, and I will try to, I hope I'll manage. I'll try to go to this. I built this debate at three hypotheses. So generally, of course, relative capabilities or relative distribution of power is crucial to American dominant global and regional position in the Asia Pacific. However, there's also regulatory position and middle power alliance that should be taken into account. Most likely, I will not go into all of these aspects within this short presentation that I'm gonna give. Naturally, China's rise results in decrease of Americans' position. But what is crucial in this topic, when I talk about strategy, American strategy in the region, I argued that Donald Trump's presidency is just continuation of Barack Obama's strategy in the region, even though it is with different means and similar goals. Just concluding, in case I will have no time for conclusions, as it usually happens with me, Donald Trump is using realist tools in order to stop China's rise, whereas Barack Obama was focusing more on liberal tools. Looking at this, it's very difficult to change relative distribution of power or of capabilities. Therefore, we have middle power allegiance. This is used by both, or was used by both presidents. And regulatory position. This was used especially by Barack Obama, who was trying to build set of regional institutions, especially conventions and regimes like Trans-Pacific Partnership, in order to exclude China from the benefits of what was called by Professor Halijak free ridership in the region, especially in economic terms. Both strategies aim at limiting change in the balance of capabilities, relative balance of capabilities. In my opinion, the first strategy of Barack Obama was more efficient than strategy of Donald Trump that will in longer run not stop China. I won't talk too much about power transition theory that's based for this discussion because it was already discussed by Professor Halijak. So I will skip it. However, just say that China cannot move to power maturity stage for this for the moment, even though its relative capabilities are similar to American relative capabilities. I will again remembering this group, refer to this nice book located here. So Enrico Fell's Composite Index on Aggregate Power. So not only one dimension, but set of dimensions. Generally, it's modified versions of Ray Klein's formula with 3 dimensions. It's called critical mass, economic capability, military capability, excluding those more heuristically researched parts that was strategy and will to participate, will to apply this this strategy in the region. I will not go into every detail, just tell you that in 2012, so it was first term of Barack Obama, still according to Enrico Fels, this great power status was to be attributed to United States, China, and Russia. Before, for 20 years, according to this way of classifying states, only United States was a great power in the Asia-Pacific. Therefore, it is an important turning point, also important turning point that, to be honest, it's been happening between 2007 and 2012 for changing American strategy towards the region. Of course, China became number 2 in this analysis. But what was more important, in 1992, Chinese power, measured power, was around 20-25% of American power, aggregate power, whereas in 2012 it was already 89%. Currently, it is bigger than American power based on this composite index on aggregate power. So Barack Obama was rebuilding, reshaping his strategy at the moment when China was catching up, whereas Donald Trump was building his strategy at the moment when China became a leader in this sense. Of course, it does not mean that in all dimensions China is a leader. For instance, I don't expect catching up in military sphere within next 30 years, as it should be at least 2 generations. And I will refer to 3 national security strategies, not going into details regarding all the countries. However, if you look at national security strategy of 2010 of Barack Obama, we have a very positive declarations. China was named positive, constructive, responsible leader in working with the US, with comprehensive engagement of the United States in relations with China. However, there are some risk challenges like monitoring of its military development, need to reduce tensions in Taiwan Strait, problems of human rights. At the same time, the Forum for Cooperation called Strategic and Economic Dialogue was composed by juxtaposition of earlier existing dialogues. That was senior dialogue in strategic relations and economic dialogue existing and created at the time of George Walker Bush, maybe surprisingly. I'll skip this. What is maybe important here? The most important issue for Barack Obama was strengthening US position in regional organization, like joining the East Asia Summit, or creation, remodeling other institutions like Trans-Pacific Partnership, institutions that excluded China. China at that time was supporting institutions, economic institutions, excluding the United States, like Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So we had two supporting institutions that were contradictory to each other. In 2015, we can see more declarations that refer to the problematic areas, especially the South China Sea. If you look at the area, plus you had this explicit declaration of what we know as pivot to the Pacific, or rebalance to the Pacific, declared initially by Hillary Clinton in her speech, then in the article in World Politics. Yeah. The United States, it was declared as a Pacific power, and there is a set of issues to be taken into account: multilateral alliances, partnerships, so middle power alliance, as I call it, like borrowing from Enrico Fels. Building as strategic partnerships with regional powers, including India, that was an important player, or become an important player. So we had all those three dimensions. So the economic dimension and relative distribution of power, not so easy to be changed. Regulatory dimension connected with regional institutions, with the domination of the US as a setting rules for the region, excluding China. So China would have to agree on American rules, and the middle power alliance, thanks to cooperation with those allies. Relations with China were still declared as constructive, stable, peaceful, and cooperative in global level. However, competition is declared, confrontation not necessarily. What was important, US was aiming at keeping the power dominance. Therefore, Barack Obama in National Security Strategy declared that we will manage the relations, but from the position of strength. Military modernization, cybersecurity issues were mentioned as declared. I've mentioned this strategic turn towards Asia that again built upon those three components: diplomatic relations with the region, military relations that was discussed relatively widely, even though in my opinion it was less important, and keeping the regulatory power. And this was rebuilding, developing this regional institution, especially Trans-Pacific Partnership, but also some other institutions. I won't talk too much about it. Gradually, the US also aimed at redeployment of its Navy. 7th Fleet was to be increased from 48 to 67 ships by 2020. That was not implemented as there were events, especially in the Middle East, that made the US not implementing it fully. So there was just small redeployment. Also, I will skip here. Also, redeployment of military was relatively minor. You had some minor changes here in Darwin in Australia. You had some changes in the Philippines, but in reality, it was not crucial. How was the policy perceived in Asia? China was not taken into account, but as for other countries, we had a lot of favorite reactions in Philippines, Vietnam, Japan, to some extent South Korea, India, but still, like if you look at the proportion, it was pretty much. There were some disputable issues, so especially Pakistan. So US started to lose Pakistan, and it's been an ongoing process within the last 15 years at least, or 20 years since the war with terror started. Malaysia, Indonesia were less interested. United States, surprisingly, was divided on the US pivot, so half more or less supporting versus opposing. I will skip this. This is a different illustration. I'll skip this data for the moment. What was Chinese perception? So China, despite of what we think, was not so optimistically perceiving Obama's policy. This is an analysis presented at the opening of Brzezinski Center within CSIS by Kevin Rudd, who became a Harvard scholar for some time. And first issue, China was afraid, looking at Barack Obama policy, that pivot rebalancing was anti-Chinese strategy. Why we observed, or Chinese observed, rising intensity proximity US space flights next to Chinese coast. Then there was cybercrime investigations made by Department of Justice. Then US-Japanese alliance was rising. There was emerging of what we now know as Quad, so cooperation between Japan, India, Australia, and the United States. Trans-Pacific Partnership that actually was built as an anti-Chinese economic bloc, according to Chinese. There was no condemnation of terrorist attacks in Xinjiang or other regions, no condemnation of anti-Chinese protests undermining Chinese system in Hong Kong or in Taiwan, and a strong pointing out of the Chinese problems. Yeah. What is the strategy of Donald Trump? Well, the first most important issue is introducing Indo-Pacific into official strategic documents. So the rising role of India. Then, of course, we have a renaming of Pacific Command into Indo-Pacific Command, etc. Won't go into details here. Probably will be discussed anyhow.
Professor, if you could go to conclusion.
Okay, then problems with China, mostly trade war, Quad. There is reference to APEC ASEAN, but rather minor. I'll skip the advice given to Donald Trump. I'll just refer to Asia Reassurance Initiative Act that strongly referred to Indo-Pacific concept and free and open Indo-Pacific strategy of Donald Trump. There was actually minor financial assistance. If you look at 2019-2023 authorization and appropriations by US Congress, the most expenditure was to security programs, 1.5 billion, more than 200 million for democracy promotion, 100 million for enhanced cooperation, and some minor issues for like human rights issues, etc. I'll skip this. And conclusions. So generally, China is an aspiring power. However, and I agree with Professor Halijak, it is satisfied aspiring power. What is important, power indices would say that both countries are at similar level. However, of course, militarily, China has a long way to go in next 30 years, not much chance that it will change. China benefits from this current trade system. This was discussed. Trump declared the war in order to delay maturity stage for China in this competition. In reality, Trump's policy is gradual shift built upon same foundations as Barack Obama built. Simply, tools differ. Neoliberal or liberal tools were applied by Barack Obama to build regional institutions, especially economic institutions, excluding China, limiting its prospects for growth based on the global shift of share of labor or regional share of labor, whereas Donald Trump applied realist methods like embargoes, sanctions, high tariffs, etc. In reality, I have impression this is less productive. If you look at results in the US was not benefiting from trade war. I was giving another presentation about it. I won't go into this. Thank you.
Much, Professor Grabowski. So it was also very interesting presentation, and thanks to the presentation, we could see the evolution of US strategy towards Asia Pacific. Thank you very much. I will try to connect with Philip Grzegorewski. I don't know if we have a connection with Philip Grzegorewski, who is the head of European Union mission in Taiwan. Philip, can you hear us? Philip? We have some problem with connection, so maybe let's see if we have an opportunity to connect with Filip Grzegorewski in 15-20 minutes. And now I would like Professor Shantanu Chakrabarti, University of Calcutta, after two presentations which focus mainly on US-China competition, which is a main topic of our panel. Let's go now to Calcutta, to India, to Shantanu Chakrabarti, who will tell us about Indian perspective on dynamic situation, transformation in Asia Pacific, and what does it mean for India, this competition, or like Professor Halivax said, hegemonic war between China and the United States. Shantanu, screen is yours.
Thank you, Professor Jankowski. Good morning, dzień dobry to everyone. It's nice to see the faces of old friends live. The topic is very interesting, and I thank the organizers for letting me share some of my thoughts with my esteemed colleagues in this panel. To add on to the important views already shared by both Professor Halijak as well as Professor Grabowski, I would like to add on that in terms of this transition of the phase from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific, it indicates a transition which Professor Amitav Acharya, writing back on the theme about 4 or 5 years back in an article, had mentioned that the frequent use of this term, particularly within United States policy circle, indicates a focus or a focus on rising importance of this region within U.S. strategic, strategic and military view. But apart from that, I think it was his criticism about the use of the term Indo-Pacific was in the sense that it seems to be, to him, more strategic ignoring the old historical linkages which had already and connectivity which had united Asia on many fronts, both economic, culture, linkages, and otherwise. And his idea was that because what did Indo-Pacific, but I think, you know, there is something more broad in developments which should be read into the subsequent projection of Indo-Pacific as a region. I think first of all, what it does is it is a major rectification of American strategic policy making, which had endured, which had focused on Asia Pacific since the end of the Second World War and beginning of Cold War politics, because it had segmentized Asia Pacific as a region. If you look at Cold War developments in various spheres of Asia Pacific, it had divided up Asia Pacific into various zones. There was also a major division in terms of the seaward focus and continental focus. And the height of which economic factor was through the creation of APEC back during 1980s. Now, what happened was, to an extent, scholars who call this refocusing as mostly strategic, ignoring the various economic factors, are correct in the sense that these strategic factors, but because to an extent it is an acceptance that even strategically you could not divide up Asia to a large extent. Because if you look at the connectivity, I'm not going to talk here about historical connectivity or even strategic connectivity focused in the Asia Pacific region during Second World War. If you look at Asia Pacific Command during Second World War under Britain here, for instance, the entire Asia Pacific Command, its headquarters first was based in New Delhi in India. Later on, it was shifted to Sri Lanka, Kandy in Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon. But the chief architects were already highlighting that you could not, were already highlighting on the fact that you could not divide up that the war command needs to be thoroughly unified, in which you could not possibly divide up South Asia, India specifically, from Southeast Asia. If you, during Second World War, if you had looked on the other hand, and if you looked at Japan's conceptualization of Greater Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, it also essentially focused on a unified Asia. To what extent it was possible or not is a different matter, but all these were strategic projections which had talked about unified Asia Pacific to an extent possible. Now, what the Americans were trying to follow a different policy following the ending of the Second World War to an extent, because it was trying to divide up, to segmentize the Asia Pacific Command into various subsectors, depending on political allegiance, availability of natural resources, oil, etc. So what is happening now, the transformation of the concept from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific, I would argue that it's a rectification of a historical mistake or misperception that you could continue with that sort of a policy. There is an increasing realization that unless you have a sort of unified outlook within your own strategic focus on the Asia Pacific region, that it's difficult to retain, it's increasingly difficult to retain control over these vast areas. And as Martin and Professor Halijak have already pointed out, particularly in the context of an increasingly rising and assertive China. Now, what might be problems with such a focus? I would just, and what, particularly as Kuba has pointed out, I will restrict myself to India's, attempts to deal with this term, because there is to an extent a greater acceptance of the concept within Indian policy making circles that Asia Pacific is being referred to as Indo-Pacific, but there is a great deal of reluctance in certain circles also in fully accepting these terms, because there are certain genuine difficulties. Now, what are these? Let me very briefly highlight. First, India's traditional aversion to officially joining any alliance. Would Indo-Pacific means acceptance of Indo-Pacific mean that India is going to become a US-led alliance, be it the four-member Quad or any other alliance? Well, India is certainly going for greater deal of naval exercises. Australia has recently rejoined the Malabar exercise. It's increasing its scale of operations with several Southeast Asian countries. Well, there are certain problems in dealing ASEAN as a unified force in here, because you already have serious differences between Malaysia and India. So I wouldn't say it's an pro-ASEAN policy, but I would say India is more comfortable in dealing with certain ASEAN powers, more comfortable than others. For instance, India has a perfect relationship with Indonesia, Singapore, of course, Vietnam, but in case of Malaysia, there might be difficulties. But the idea is that it's difficult to see, because Indian former foreign secretary and the current foreign minister, very recently, about 2 months back, in a web seminar, he had once again said that India is not going to formally join any alliance. India is going to take its strategic autonomy very seriously. So to an extent, if you would like to see, and you have these reluctances. India is certainly wary of China. You have recent differences in China, the recent problems in Ladakh and in Galwan Valley on the Indo-Bhutan border. There is certainly opposition to Belt and Road Initiative with India. But on the other hand, India, along with China, are founding members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. India still continues to be a member of the BRICS alliance. So it's not that India is going to steadfastly oppose anything or any organization in which China is going to become a member. So that's one thing. Second is that it's not that India is going to acceptance anything which is being projected by United States or by the other Asian powers. I mean, one major blow to this concept of building up, trying to build up a sort of formidable economic alliance is within Asia, again, was frustrated by the fact that India rejected the proposal to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was a major blow to the concept of building up this formidable economic alliance. So that India's traditional aversion to alliance makes India wary of joining any formal alliance with United States in command. So to that extent, it itself dilutes the Indo-Pacific strategic focus of United States to a large extent. That's number one. Number two is, of course, as I was mentioning, Amitav Acharya's article written 4 or 5 years back, about there is a lot of historical legacy related to this concept of Indo-Pacific. Now, within Asia, that often creates disturbances. Many of Southeast Asian and East Asian countries are not going to be very comfortable with this term or with this term Indo-Pacific, because on the one hand, it brings out colonial memories. If you go back to colonial histories again, and if you look at the region, look at the terms used like Indochina, for instance, Greater India, for instance, for a vast portion of the region covering Southeast Asia. Now, bringing back that term might once again revoke those memories of colonial occupation and colonial politics. And to an extent, I mean, to give you one example, there are various examples. For instance, from an anthropological and archaeological point of view, there was a lot of Indian historical settlements in various Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, like Myanmar, etc. But among my colleagues who are historians and archaeologists, when they go to dig any archaeological sites in these Southeast Asian countries like Laos, like Vietnam, like Myanmar, they are very conscious to avoid this phrase Indian influence. The usual term used is to say acculturization. So Indian influence along with local indigenous influence, all building up a sort of hybrid culture there. Because as long as they mention it, it's all right. But as long as you have any mentioning of old historical connectivity and all that Indian influence in these regions, it creates problems in various Southeast Asian countries. So when you try to use this term, Indo-Pacific, there is a chance that there might be problems within at intra-Asian level connectivity and diplomatic connectivity to an extent. The third and last factor which I'm going to mention is, of course, which that the so-called absent factor, which none of us speak to a large extent. What about Russia? Does it still continue to be an important power in Asia-Pacific region? I would argue it does, particularly if you look at its growing bonhomie with the Chinese establishment in recent years. It's not against India. If you look at just a few weeks back, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and the Chinese Foreign Minister were both participated in a webinar in Southeast Asia, in which both of them categorically said that the term Indo-Pacific is a term which is not going to be acceptable to them because they think it's a US creation. And why it's not acceptable to them? Because they think that it essentially tries to break up the whole Asia-Pacific structure. They still think that the existing Asia-Pacific structure should be maintained to deal with various problems which are emanating globally as well as regionally, and they think that the use of this term, Indo-Pacific, is going to thoroughly destroy this term, and this is being deliberately done by United States. Now, it's a complex case because very recently, I was reading an interview given by the Russian chief of Carnegie Foundation, based in Moscow. In a recent interview in a journal, they said that does it mean that does Russian support, or does Russian alliance with China, is it going to be detrimental to India? And he significantly said that, well, India continues to be a major partner of ours. We have our, we have our old connectivity with India, and of course, we are now trying to focus on new areas, etc. But significantly, he said that, in case of India and China, it's not that they remain more or less neutral in case of recent Indo-China flare-up. And he said that in case of Russia and China, it's not that Russia and China looks at all the global and regional problems, particularly in the Asia Pacific. They are not always on the same board, but significantly he mentioned that we ensure that our policies do not run detrimental to each other. So I think Russia still, and particularly if you look at the continental connection, because Indo-Pacific, the concept of Indo-Pacific being used in US strategic circles these days, essentially still focuses on seas and oceans. But there are vast continents around these seas and oceans. And you cannot deal with Asia Pacific in its entirety if you neglect the continent. And to that extent, Russia still continues to be an important player. And even if you look at India, I mean, when India
Professor
talks about,
Fantano, if you could
yeah.
go to conclusion.
Pardon?
If you could make conclusion very soon.
Yeah, I'm concluding. I mean, so in terms of, if you look at India's positioning on around this concept of Indo-Pacific, I would say it's half and half. Our concerns are mainly still with Indian Ocean. There is an increasing wariness about Chinese intrusion into the Indian Ocean. And India is trying to countermatch it by building up its own naval capability in the region. It's trying to, pinprick China in its areas by organizing exercises, by organizing naval visits in various Southeast Asian countries near China's neighborhood. But apart from its focus on the ocean, a lot of this Indo-Pacific policy, again, is continental, because India's Indo-Pacific policy covers vast portions of Africa. There is traditional interest in East Africa, and now we're trying to go even beyond. Africa is important because not only in terms of trade and commerce, as well as natural resources. For instance, it was eyeing countries like Niger, etc., for supplying of atomic raw materials like thorium, etc. It's not settled. So all these, and then again, it's also going to focus, if you look at the focusing on Central Asia, as well as Afghanistan, etc., it's going to be continental. And if it's going to be continental, you cannot ignore Russia in those areas, particularly with its refocusing back on the Eurasian Union and all that. So I would argue that these are the three major problems with which India has in US conceptualizing of Indo-Pacific. Yes, to an extent, it's acceptable in official circles, but number one problem is it's essentially a rectification of US's historical mistake of trying to segmentize the Asia-Pacific region by trying to find out the united nature of Asia-Pacific by renaming it as Indo-Pacific. It's not only that, and two, there are regional and intra-Asian level divisions and debates over this concept, because there are historical and colonial connotations which India has difficulties, and India and other countries in the region have problems around this concept. And third factor, which I said, is Russia. If you look at Russia in alliance with China, still is going to, I have a hunch that you still will have these two powers playing important role in this region. And last of all, India's traditional reluctance to formally join any alliance. So it would be a member of the Quad. You will see increasing the Indo-US connectivity, but to an extent, whether Indo-Pacific, whether this concept of Indo-Pacific is going to create any formal alliance, I still remain very doubtful about that. Thank you very much.
Professor Chakrabarty, for your presentation, and I think we'll have also time to discuss during the debate, because it was very interesting, and the role of Moscow in Asia Pacific, and your last statement, what does it mean Indo-Pacific, and the question about Quad, what does it mean Quad? Is it a real alternative in Asia Pacific, or it is only very artificial concept? It is still a huge debate in this context. So Shantanu, thank you very much, and we are lucky to have a connection with Taiwan. After some problem, we set up a connection with Taipei, and with Filip Grzegorzewski, the head of European Union mission to Taiwan, and we are very happy. We are very happy to listen, Philip, your perspective on the role of Taiwan in the US China competition. What does it mean? Because Professor Haliczak told about a hegemonic war, present the concept of hegemonic war in the context of China, in the context of China-US relations. And if you could tell us what is the perception, Taiwanese perception on this issue. It is the first question. And what does it mean today for Taiwan, this relations between the United States and China, which was in the last years quite tense, and what implications for Taiwan? What does it, and what kind of implications for East Asia can you could indicate? So Philip, I think 12 minutes. So 12 minutes for Taipei. So we'll go from Warsaw to Taipei.
Hi, Jakub. I hope you can hear me. If you can nod, great. First of all, I'm really happy to be able to join you from Taipei. I'm a bit late joining the discussion. The reason for that is that I'm not only privileged to take part in academic discussions as today, but I'm also a practitioner of diplomacy, and I was caught up in an event from which I was unable to escape. So thank you very much for your patience, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here today with you in this excellent company. I missed the intervention of Professor Haliczak, but I hope I will be able to catch up and to see it later on. To reply on your question on Taiwan's role in US-China relationship and US-China hegemonic war, that's exactly what every researcher in Taiwan is trying to analyze, and what the press and media and the academics in Taiwan cover basically every single day. So there is no more timely question than this in Taiwan. We don't have much time, so I'll try to be very, very concise. When you look at the relationship between the US and China from the perspective of Taiwan today, Taiwan is caught in that rivalry right in the middle. But also with the DPP government, Taiwan is clearly taking sides, leaning directly to the US and depending very much on the US as far as Taiwan's security, Taiwan's prosperity, Taiwan's future is concerned. When you look at it from a more academic and long-term perspective, Taiwan can play a stabilizing role in US-China relations. But you can only realize it when you go beyond the present tensions, the present situation in the cross-strait relationship. The US traditionally dealing with China has 4 buttons to push. One is Taiwan. The second button that the US has to use, or is able to use when dealing with China, is South China Sea. The third button is trade relationship with China, and the fourth button is North Korea. The US decided to now play with tension with China using the 4 buttons, Taiwan being one of them, which caught a little bit Xi Jinping's administration seemingly by surprise at the beginning of President Trump's term. Then the issue of Taiwan became a bit more prominent in the perspective of Beijing. Now, Xi Jinping is tightening its hand on Hong Kong, and Taipei is being afraid of becoming another case of increased pressure from Beijing. And clearly the one country, 2 systems speech by President Xi was not well received in Taipei, although the intention of Beijing was the opposite. When Xi Jinping came up with the one country, 2 systems offer to Taipei, it was meant as a friendly gesture from China's side. It was not at all received as such by Taipei. President Tsai Ing-wen, since the beginning of her first term, is refusing to clearly sign up to the 1992 consensus that has been the basis of the relationship between the government of Taiwan and the government of the People's Republic of China, which became a sine qua non condition for Beijing to develop any sort of a relationship. And the situation now is that, formally, the relationship between Taiwan and China is non-existent. There are, on daily basis, military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. The middle line between China and Taiwan is crossed on the daily basis by China, which mobilizes Taiwanese military response again on daily basis. The military planes, the fighter jets are being put up, and we are very close to a confrontation between the 2 sides of the strait. But at the same time, there is a clear interdependence, economic interdependence between China and Taiwan. which an interdependence, economic interdependence, which actually grew when you compare it to the situation before President Tsai Ing-wen and DPP took power. Then another aspect which is very important for the bilateral relationship between Taiwan and China is the call for the global restructure of the supply chains, with attempts by the US to economically cut off China. Taiwan, when you look at it from Taiwan's perspective, is hoping to play an important role in this new economy, especially in the most advanced sectors of the economy. Well, Taiwan would like to be part of the global supply chains created by the US, with TSMC as a flagship example of cooperation and investments that could bring Taiwan and the US closer. But at the same time, well, China is the biggest market for Taiwan, and the prosperity of the island depends very much on the market of China. So the economic connection and the pressure from the US is a factor in this relationship. I started with saying that Taiwan can play a stabilizing role in this US-China relations, and I want to end with that as well. It's now a few days before the elections in the US. It's not obvious when you look at Taiwan's role, and when you look at the relationship between China and the US and the prominence of China in the political campaign ahead of the elections in the US, and the issue of Taiwan being there. But clearly Taiwan is an important factor in this bipolar world, with East Asia being the place where the two superpowers are confronting each other. And it has clear implications not only for the stability of Asia, but also for the global stability of this bipolar structure in international relations.
Philip, for presenting us Taiwanese perspective on the transformation of order in Asia Pacific. So thank you very much for also very interesting presenting this perspective. So we are therefore very good presentation, and now it's time to discuss, to debate. So of course each panelist also could make comment on another presentation. So before I open screen for all of you, and also for participants who join us, who join this panel. So please put on chat if you would like to have any question. Please put, or if you would like to make comments, please put on chat this that you would like to ask or to make comments. So I open now chat so I could see. So if you have any comments, I will give the screen to you. But before I open a discussion, I have one, two questions to all of you. So the first question may be to mostly to Professor Grabowski, but also if you could, if all of you could answer to this because Martin, you presented in your presentation some data information about how much money United States is going to spend in the context of new strategy in Indo-Pacific, and it is among scholars. As you know, it is a discussion about what does it mean Indo-Pacific, or is it a real concept or not? What does it mean a Quad? Is it is a real cooperation, or it is only a very artificial concept? And a lot of critics put stress that it is not a real cooperation, military security cooperation. It is not so much money from United States to support this idea of Quad. So what do you? It's not only to you, but also to Professor Halijak, Shantanu, Philip. What do you think? A Quad is a real platform of cooperation. It could be a real pillar of a security architecture in Asia Pacific or Indo Pacific, or it is very weak, very artificial. I would like to remind that we had now a few days ago the meetings of leaders of Quad in Tokyo. So is it only just a declaration, just a meeting, or is it a real instrument of balancing of China highs? So I would be very interesting what all of you thinking, and especially in the context of China-U.S. hegemonic war. Can United States treat Quad as a real instrument in this war, or for United States still bilateral agreements? It will be still the most important, especially in the context of security sphere. So is it the first question? And the second question also to all of you, we heard the opinion of Shantanu about the Moscow, the role of Russia in Asia Pacific, in Indo-Pacific. I'm not so convinced. Because what does it mean? For example, if we take into account security, even if we take into account the Quad, can we treat Moscow as a real player in the security architecture in Indo-Pacific? And in this context, what do you think in the future when we'll have two blocks? China bloc, which will be led by China, and the Quad. What do you think for Moscow will join in future to which block? So two questions, and maybe we'll start from Professor Halijak, later Professor Grabowski, Shantanu, and Philip, and of course later you will have also chance to ask a question. Okay.
I'd like to start from a question to Philip. You said that in recent years, during the DPP government, the level of economic interdependence between Taiwan and China has been deepened, increased. So could you be more specific? And the second additional question: in a few weeks ago, China declared to set up in Shenzhen new economic zone, free economic zone. according to many experts, this economic zone associated with the Hong Kong and Macau could be treated as an instrument of integrating with Taiwan, especially by alluring Taiwanese capital to absorb Taiwanese capital to create favorable conditions for locating Taiwanese money in China. This is my question and my comments. As for comments and my answer to the question posed by the other head of this panel. How the third countries like Russia, China, India, ASEAN countries react to the emerging bipolarism between China and the United States. Is this new bipolar system will resemble Cold War system when there were two blocks, Eastern run by Soviet Union and Western by the United States. Since 2014, in my presentation, I am arguing that US-China bipolar system is a flexible system. It's not tied to one, like a Cold War US-Soviet. What does it mean flexible? It means that third countries, third parties, like Taiwan, like Russia or India, try to set up the equal distance toward the China and the United States in order to get benefits from both competing power. The India and other Southeast Asian are interested in developing relations from China and the United States in order to get more and more. This is my main argument. So this bipolar system being so flexible is not very dangerous. That is mean that it will not lead to the competition, to the war or disastrous effects like a Cold War type bipolar system. So what more I am arguing that third countries are more interested in competition between China and the United States because it creates, more room for maneuver for them by declaring not joining China or the United States. Quad is a concept discussed since at least 5 years. And what happens? Nothing. It's just a disputable idea because Quad do not have a chance to be transferred into institutionalized bloc under the leadership of the United States, because other states formally agreed to cooperate, but not to engage the Chinese bloc. This is my opinion. Thank you.
Sir, for your question and also for answering my question. And before we'll go to Philip, because Professor Kalivak asked 2 questions to Philip, if I could have an opinion for my questions and also for comments of Professor Kalivak from Professor Grabowski and from Shantanu about Quad and about the role of Moscow. So let's go and how United States treat Quad in its own strategy. It is just only declaration. It is or in future we could see that it will be a real alliance, or it is maybe it is a new type of alliance. So maybe we should not use the term which we used to use during the Cold War, but we should adjust this term to the new situation. So Marcin will go now to you.
Thank you, Professor Jankowski. And I'm happy to try not to agree with Professor Halijak and say that Quad is an important concept. I don't want to say it must be institutionalized. Whatever is an institution, yeah, with a set of conventions or regime. Of course, I don't imagine an organization created here. It's been based on a rising cooperation between United States and India that started, okay, we could even say at the turn of 21st century, not very successfully promoted by Bill Clinton, but pretty successfully implemented by George Walker Bush and reinforced by a nuclear agreement from 2007 between India and the United States, naturally regarding the civilian nuclear cooperation. Then it was built up by Barack Obama in his pivot to Asia strategy with debate whether we have kind of natural collaboration or natural overlaps of Indian Act East policy and Narendra Modi's Act East policy and Barack Obama pivot or rebalancing to Asia Pacific. And naturally it was then renamed or conceptualized into Indo-Pacific strategy, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy by Donald Trump and his administration. And even though we don't observe institutionalization to the high level, we don't see institutionalization with other regional alliances either. Therefore, for sure, we see changes in the structure of American administration, in the structure of American military, and renaming this Pacific Command into Indo-Pacific Command, preparing proper military strategy and publishing a paper within Pacific or Indo-Pacific Command now, providing financial resources for these activities, including joint military activities, drills that are openly directed to oppose rising of Chinese influence in the region, may prove that this is a real change and a real strategy. However, it's not a drastic change. It's been a natural process built upon what was done by predecessors of Donald Trump, especially George Walker Bush, that I've omitted in my presentation, but we've even in this within this distinguished group that discussed this issue a couple of times before. But especially at Barack Obama's strategy. So, in my opinion, it is a real strategy. There is a real engagement, and there is a clear goal. I may also comment on the Russian engagement in the region that I perceive weak, and I'm absolutely agreeing that Russia will lose more trying to collaborate with China as a minor partner in the game, because such a status is not beneficial for Russia. Russia that will lose then its influence in Central Asia gradually. That's been happening from monopolistic position to duopolistic that we observe now. But the role of China will grow in the future as well. So the only way for Russia should be collaborating with the West. That, of course, is a problem with current political leadership in Russia. Of course, Russia has limited resources in terms of population, in terms of economic resources to be fully engaged in in the Asia-Pacific. The answer to question whether in case of bipolar system, Russia would engage into China-led bloc or US-led bloc, I think that Russia should engage into US-led bloc if it thinks about its survival in a current form. This is a difficult decision to Russia. I will also refer to this collaboration of other countries with the United States. The shift we've been observing is a natural shift of Pakistan, visible since early 21st century, as Pakistan was treated improperly, let's say, by the United States. Of course, it stayed US ally in early 21st century, but then at the Barack Obama we've observed relatively fast shift of Pakistan towards collaboration, closer collaboration with China. As for other countries, China does not have many allies in the region. We could say it's Cambodia. We could say it's Laos. Even Myanmar seems to be hedging to a certain degree. There was a moment when we still had Obama and Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines in 2016. But after the election of Donald Trump, Rodrigo Duterte began closer collaboration with the US again. So China is still in worse position in terms of middle power or even the rest alliance in the region, and that's been pretty complicated to change it. Whether it can be a new Cold War, I wouldn't say so at this point. Also because there is drastic disproportion of military capabilities, and China is not wasting resources at this very point for increasing its military capabilities. That it was also discussed by Professor Halijak many times, remembering speeches. It's a military expenditure is relatively low. It's 3 times lower than American military expenditure, and catching up in this dimension requires up to 2 generations, presuming you spend at least the same. Of course, labor costs, even soldiers as a labor, is much lower in China, but high-tech development costs plus option of copycatting of imitating American military development become less likely or less accessible for China. Therefore, this military catch-up will take longer than we normally expect. Why I say 2 generations to build a new type of weapons, like a new aircraft carrier, you need 20 years. You need 20 years to build a new fighter, new plane. Yeah, so it's pretty difficult for China to get to this level. I don't mean situation when you have 273 fighters and you build 274th. Yeah, but I mean new type, new class of aircraft carriers, new class of sophisticated weaponry. Finally, maybe I'll stop here because I'm already talking long, and I see our chairman to
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Martin, for very comprehensive answer. And don't worry, we have still about 10 15 minutes, so in the end we'll come back to you. So now let's go to Calcutta. Shantanu, we would be very interesting in your opinion, and what is your answer for this 2 questions, and if you have any comments also to what Professor Halijak and Professor Grabowski have told, so please feel free. So Shantanu, what about Quad and the Moscow, whole of Moscow?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. As you said, it's still a concept which is being developed from around 2014-15 onwards, and we need to see whether this is a policy making which cuts across bipartisan division, whether it becomes acceptable within the American strategic community. Now, one problem, I have a hunch that even if you have full acceptance of this as a strategic conceptualization, we cannot afford to go back to Cold War days. Unlike American-Russian divide, you cannot you will not have an American-Chinese divide, because both their economies are, however hard you try to go for a trade war, etc., both are very much dependent upon each other. So is Asia connected with China. Even at its height, India, since its latest flare-up, the government is trying to project a policy of reducing your trade dependence on China, etc. But if you still go for if you look at electronic products across India, it's essentially Chinese, which are more cost effective and which are cheaper. That's how they have conquered the global market. There is no denying the fact. It's going to be seen, it needs to be seen to what extent China manages to overcome the economic problems, etc., which had been created through the COVID, by this pandemic, and how it economic fares up. We need to look at what happens in the November Communist Party session, to what extent Xi Jinping gets targeted within that, and how he manages to flare up. But there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that its policy of Belt and Road Initiative has had a massive hit. There is a lot of Asian angst being generated all across Asia, because it's not perceived to be as much beneficial as it was being perceived to be 4 or 5 years earlier. So it's certainly that Asian countries are increasingly getting wary of China, but doing away with China is an impossibility. Everyone realizes that, including India. So I guess at some level, both the Americans as well as the Indian establishment has to work out something. India is continuing to have its regular meetings with the Chinese military establishment, as well as talks are going on at various diplomatic circles. We need to see what happens to the U.S. establishment beyond November 3rd. If there is a change of government, to what extent that refocuses on its diplomacy with China, or even if Trump comes back, it seems to be unlikely. But even if it does, you would need to see how he negotiates with China. So amidst this, you are not going to have a Cold War-like division within the Indo-Pacific divide. As a result, now, if you are not having that, to what extent are you projecting Indo-Pacific? Indo-Pacific, I guess it's going to be a game of, I wouldn't say brinkmanship, but certainly a game of trying to apply pressures on each other and trying to weary out each other. To that extent, you will have, and what about the participants? I mean, certainly United States and China are going to be big players in determining the Indo-Pacific, but Indo-Pacific would need Asian entities, right? And to that extent, Asian entities are not either on the Chinese board or on the American board on this concept. If you look at ASEAN, this division becomes clear in various ASEAN meetings. Both the term Asia Pacific as well as Indo-Pacific are being mentioned. If you look at the strategic Shangri-La dialogues in Singapore, it's being mentioned. To an extent, there was a realization on the part of the US establishment that their original conceptualization of Indo-Pacific around 2011, 2012, and even in 2015 was more strategic than focus on economy. And they tried to change that. In very recent years, for instance, the US is talking in terms of creating a blue dot network in the Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific region, trying to counter the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. The Blue Dot Network talks about American investments in partnership with Japanese and Australian investments in throughout the Asia Pacific region, trying to build up regional infrastructure. Now, clearly, it tries to counter the Belt and Road Initiative with China. But again, very vague, not essentially clear. It's just been conceptualized. We do not know if there is a change of guard in the United States. It's going to be carried forward. And till now, it's only Japan and Australia. If Blue Dot Network needs to be successful without China, you need other partners around like China, and you need full-fledged support of ASEAN. But there are other political dynamics being carried out there in which ASEAN is going to be very divided. And for instance, if you look at the recent flare-up between Malaysia and France, for instance, that is also going to be a major problem. Now, would you have ASEAN, when you have these sort of problems, in these years, there seems to be a growing convergence of between Malaysia and Pakistan, trying to focus on the Islamic question, the prestige of Islam in global politics, whereas Saudi Arabia is turning out to be more sober and it's becoming more closer to India in these connections. So you have a multiple level of, you have a series of games, strategic games, which are being carried out within Asia. And this concept of this transition from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific is just another game. I don't see this becoming the real strategic question determining Indo-Pacific or Asia Pacific, whichever way you like it, in coming years. And Kuba, when I talk about Russia, that nobody talks about the invisible member on the board or member on the table. I'm not saying Russia is as strong as United States or China in Asia, but remember, Russia still controls a large portion throughout Central Asia and the Eurasian borderlands. And to an extent, if you look at the continental dimensions of Indo-Pacific, these regions continue to be important. And secondly, in maritime affairs, if you look at growing convergence of interests between China and Russia, particularly vis-a-vis United States, as it stands today in end of October 2020, you have a strong alliance between Russia and China determined to thwart US projection of Indo-Pacific. Now, it might be that with any change of guard in the United States, it's going to renegotiate its positions with Russia, and Russia might change its stance, but less unlikely. So I would argue that in alliance with China, Russia is going to remain a very important player in the Indo-Pacific region in the times to come.
Very much, Shantanu. So I think we have a topic for next panel in next year, because Professor Grabowski and me, we have a little different perspective opinion, because in first of all, I think that Quad will become more and more important instrument, and the second thing about the role of Moscow, I think that they will not be so important in Indo-Pacific. Why? Because they don't have capabilities now. They have a lot of domestic challenges. So as Professor Grabowski said, firstly, Moscow will concentrate more on Central Asia, not on Indo-Pacific, and I'm very skeptical, Shantanu, about the possibilities of closer political, strategic, military cooperation between Moscow and Beijing in the future. I'm more in favor of March in perspective, but it is topic for another seminar conference. And now let's go to Taipei. Philip, you had two questions from Professor Halivak, and if you could answer, we will be very grateful. And of course, if you also make comments about Indo-Pacific Quad, also will appreciate. So Philip, screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Jakub. Well, so many issues that you touched upon. Starting with Russia. Well, Russia has a mission in Taiwan, but seen from Taipei, it's not a player in terms of security, regional security in this part of the world. Indo-Pacific. When I ask my American colleagues here what the concept of Indo-Pacific actually means, they tell me that it's basically the pivot towards Asia minus multilateral trade. So TPP minus multilateral trade, more emphasis on bilateral trade. So the concept of Indo-Pacific is clearly there. That's the idea that is going to be promoted. For how long, we'll see after the November elections. But clearly, there is more of a continuation from the US side. Quad, there would be high hopes to see Quad as an active part of the security set up in Asia, but it's not there. It's unfortunately it's not part of today's reality in this part of the world. So Quad, unfortunately, is not existent yet. Now, on the interdependence between China and Taiwan, the question raised by Professor Halijak, the numbers are surprising. That's true. This interdependence is growing despite the declaration and despite the political climate now in the Strait. Concrete numbers are quite surprising as well, with more than 40% of Taiwan's exports going to China now. The latest numbers were indicating even 42-43%, which is an increase from the time of the previous government of President Ma Ying-jeou. The reasons for that are various. One is that, Taiwan is what it is, and it is where it is. It's the biggest contracting party to China and the biggest investor still, and it plays a role in China's economy, and it will play a role there. One of the reasons that I hear from experts in Taipei is that, the Taiwanese companies are getting ready for restructuring of the supply chains, and they want to have a foot on the ground in China and do what they have to do in terms of their business with China before the changes are implemented. So they expect the numbers to go down in the future. But for the moment, this interdependence is clearly very, very high. Professor Halijak mentioned a new economic zone in Shenzhen as a possible place where Taiwan investors could be attracted, lured into by China. With the present political climate, I think it would be difficult, but who knows what happens in the coming months and years. There were hopes in Taiwan to turn Taiwan into new Hong Kong for the banking sector with the takeover of Hong Kong that has been developing over the last months and 2 years. The press and the experts in Taiwan were quite enthusiastic about the possible role that Taiwan could play in the banking sector. But I think that Taiwan is not ready for that yet. I would see a role rather for Singapore, maybe even for China itself, for places like Shanghai or Shenzhen. I think it's too early still for Taiwan to take over this role from Hong Kong. Surprisingly, for some, the European Union is the biggest investor in Taiwan. This is something that not everyone knows about, that the EU is the biggest investor, the biggest provider of FDI in Taiwan by far. Before Brexit, it was more than 33% of FDI in Taiwan coming from the European Union, more than 1/3 of all the FDI in Taiwan coming from the EU. Now, after Brexit, the numbers went down to a bit more than 1/4 and growing. So it's 25% of all the FDI stock in Taiwan coming from the EU. And the numbers are growing with the offshore wind investments. But that's, again, Jakub, an idea for another seminar on the EU's role in Asia. Now, Professor Halijak also mentioned the new, the flexibility of the new bipolar system, which is being created in Asia. I couldn't agree more. Well, Taiwan has played a role here over the last years with putting all the eggs into one basket in terms of its public diplomacy, communication, being there on the US side. But when you look at the economic figures, there's still a clear connection with China and a bit of hedging on China, even for Taiwan. And when you take a bit of a longer perspective, I think this flexibility is clearly there of this bipolar system, and other actors, other countries in this part of the world will definitely follow. I'd like to give you at this very end a few ideas for why Taiwan matters in East Asia, and why it matters for the European Union, but why it also will matter for the US and for China. And the first and the most obvious one is that Taiwan is the 21st global economy and growing. And with the pandemic now, with the whole world going down, Taiwan has managed to keep a positive growth, and the numbers, the economic indicators for 2020 will be very positive. The second reason is that Taiwan is a beacon of democracy, and here Taiwan sees eye to eye with India, and it's one of the reasons why Taiwan and India's relationship is so important now, with Taiwan investing a lot of effort, a lot of political energy in developing its presence in India. So beacon of democracy. Then Taiwan is a model of rule of law, a model not only for its immediate neighborhood, but also beyond. for human rights, and that's something that that is quite exceptional in this part of the world. We discussed the global supply chains, the restructuring of the global supply chains, and Taiwan's role, unique role that it can play, linking the US and China economy. While experts in Taiwan have doubts whether it's possible to create two separate economic systems, it will probably not happen. But if the two superpowers push in this direction, well, at least one, then Taiwan is well placed to play a role in between. And then last but not least, Taiwan is essential for the regional security and for the security of the whole system. So just to wrap up, I'm very grateful to Jakub for coming up with this idea of the panel, because it's super timely and it's very, very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Philip, for your opinion, answering for a question, and also your comments. So we have now still 5 minutes, and we'll finish. But if some of you or somebody from public has any questions, so maybe let's see if somebody from audience have any question, comments, please feel free. If not anybody would like to put a question, so it is we have 5 minutes, so maybe 1 minute for final comments from each panelist. Will start from Professor Haliwak, later Professor Grabowski, Shanta, Professor Chakrabarti, and Filip Grzegorzewski, head of European Union delegation mission in Taiwan. So let's start from Professor Haliwak. 1 minute.
Okay, I am glad to participate in such interesting panel. So I think this panel will survive, and there will be a continuation of our discussion on this subject. And now I hope that our lovely chairman will invite us for a dinner. Thank you.
Okay, I'll also...
Thank you very much, and Professor Grabowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank all the panelists also for the fact that we had a chance not to agree with each other, which is not so obvious. That's a very good sign of high quality of this panel. I'm really happy, and I'm really thankful to the conveners of the panel, both Professor Haliwak and Professor Zajączkowski, to the panelists, Professor Chakrabarti, Filip Grzegorzewski, for participating, and I'm also hoping for a new round of debate after U.S. presidential election that's just coming, as it may mean either continuation or change. However, I'm not so sure about the real change in terms of goals, no matter who wins the election. However, the means may change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Grabowski, and let's go now to Calcutta.
Well, thank you, Chairperson, and also let me thank the organizers again for being kind enough to invite me to share some of my thoughts related to Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is a term, is a concept which is going to be around, and you will see various, it being conceptualized by various strategic community as well as governments and states in their own specific ways. It's something which is still hazy, or as it's currently fashionable to say, that it still exists in a fuzzy state, and it would take some time to really shape up. But even when it begins to shape up, I guess it's going to be a multidimensional concept, which is not fully controlled by either the United States or by China. But it's going to be somewhere in between, with a large number of Asian rising powers playing an important role. And we will have further opportunities to discuss this concept in the future conferences to come. Hopefully, some of these would be in Warsaw University, because webinars are good in these trying times. But I certainly miss, I'm sure all of you do, the post-conference coffee and discussions.
Okay, thank you very much, Fantanu. And last but not least, Filip Grzegorewski, let's go to Taipei for last word of our panel.
Thanks. And when you say let's go to Taipei, I take it literally. So do come to Taipei. I'll be more than happy to invite you all for dinner here. I think well, for me personally, it's a great opportunity to take a different perspective, more academic one, because, well, being a practitioner means that I have to focus more on the present state of the relationship, and taking a step back and having more of a strategic, more of a thoughtful perspective is really beneficial. So I really enjoyed it. And it's so much different to hear you, to hear Professor Haliczak, to hear Professor Grabowski. Well, reading you is one thing, but then hearing you is even better. So thank you for this opportunity, Jakub.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you all of panelists, Professor Haliczak, Professor Grabowski, Professor Chakrabarty, and the head, the director of Filip Grzegorewski. Thank you very much for great contribution. And as Professor Grabowski and Haliczak said, we hope that to our discussion will also give some inspiration for next debate, for next discussion. We put quite a lot of questions. We try to answer for some of them, and we had some differences, what is very good, and I hope it will give a lot of inspiration for our next panel seminars in Calcutta, Taipei, Krakow, or in Warsaw. So thank you very much, and I would like to finish today panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.